Good afternoon. I'd like to share an idea about our cities. In November last year, hundreds of people turned up in Dubai to discuss what are the big issues into the next couple of decades. Cities did not get onto that agenda, and that worried me. Why? Because at the moment, 50% of us live in cities, 3.5 million people. In the next 40 years, that's going to rise to 70%, and that's going to be 6.4 billion. We're almost going to have to double the urban capacity since we started civilization in 40 years. And that's pumping out 75 to 80% of the greenhouse gases. Cities are the problem, and we need to find a solution to them. Otherwise, we're not going to solve the problem that faces us, which is climate change. What happened to our cities? After the Industrial Revolution, we relied on two utopian ideas. The one was that we could, through the modernists, simplify our cities, we could rationalize them, we could separate things out, and we created very poor living environments. Many of these have been built, and particularly in Asia. The other utopian idea was the Garden City movement, that somehow we could live in the country and we could work in the city. And if only the trains and trams in Melbourne were as uncrowded as that. This is what we built, and this is how we spend much of our day. And this is the infrastructure that is resulting from this concentration of those movements back into our city. Big infrastructure is not only vulnerable, it's inefficient. If Melbourne is to expand by another 1 million people, and that's what it's about to do, the politicians' reaction is that we just take another 40,000 hectares of land and subdivide it on the fringes. But we know that doesn't work. If you go to Griffith University's vampire study, what it tells us is the people on the periphery increasingly are suffering from financial and social isolation. We also know that it's inefficient in terms of our money. It costs about $300 million more over 50 years to put 1,000 houses on the fringe as it does within the centre of the city. If you therefore expand Melbourne by 1 million and put half of that on the fringe, it'll cost you 110 billion more than you have to spend. Basically, the situation we've got is our cities are not efficient in the way that they're currently built. Am I optimistic about how cities can change? Yes, I am. Basically, in 2006, I was asked by the European Union to look at cities that transformed themselves. And I looked at 12 cities, and some of them were Glasgow. Glasgow, after the war, it actually decentralized its population and was failing socially and economically. In 1985, it started to centralize its population and started to succeed. Bordeaux, another strategy was to build a high-quality public realm. Trams, good spaces, good public spaces, and they brought people back to the city. 170,000 people a day climbing onto a tram system they hadn't had previously. In Malmo, in 1985, when the shipping industry went off to Korea, lost 40% of its workforce. What it did was built a university downtown, a bridge to Copenhagen, and built this piece of zero carbon urbanism. Basically, it collects its water, collects its own energy, is built to 120 people per hectare. Feels very familiar when you walk there. In Bogota, and I had to slip in two that weren't European, you had Enrique Peñalosa. And Peñalosa came into power saying he would not spend another cent on the car. And what he did was he built bikeways, bus roads, parks, etc. And he dropped the crime rate in Bogota by 85%. That's political courage. And we've seen political courage because when Seoul held the Olympics, this is where their stream was. And what they did is they actually took the road down and reintroduced their stream. In Melbourne, we've seen a transformation of a city over the last 25 years. And I won't go through the strategies, but there's one I'd like to just share with you. This is a transformational strategy. It's taking pieces of infrastructure, in this case buildings, and reusing them. At the end of the 1980s, with the property crash, what happened is we put together a program to reuse these buildings. We transformed office buildings into residential buildings. And this is what happened. Each one of those red dots is 5 people or 5 dwellings. This completely transformed the centre of Melbourne without building very much, just taking redundant office buildings and transferring them in the main to residential. What I want to talk to you about now is what I call the 7.5% city. I believe we can actually double the population of our cities by using approximately 7.5% of the land. And in doing that, we can make them better cities. If you jump up in a helicopter and have a look at most of the cities, and these are the suburban cities that Australia is part of, you'll find railway stations, and around them you'll find a concentration of activity. If you walk around that and measure Melbourne's case, it came to about 6,500 hectares. And if you then take a reasonable density over 60% of that area, you can get 860,000 people in that without building higher than about 6 to 7 stories within those centres. It's important because those activity centres are well connected. They're well connected by rail, and therefore those people can get to other locations. Unfortunately, radial, so it's into the centre of the city. But then if you look at the road-based public transport systems, and I'll show you how we measured this, it's another 3% of the area. And that's the road-based public transport system in Melbourne. The yellow are the trams, the others are the buses. We've got a fantastic public transport system, but underutilised. We then went to test the capacity of this. We went to measure every cadastral parcel in the city metro area. There's 1.5 million of those. And along the road, tram and bus routes, we excluded any properties that were in the central city or in activity centres, and we got that diagram you can see on the right-hand side there of the selected parcels. We then took out sensitivities within those for redevelopment. We took out parks, we took out public use and industry. We only selected parcels where there was another form of access so that we could get decent streets. 30 years of urban design a good street, you design a good city. Why? It's 80% of the public realm. So we only selected where we could get alternative forms of access. We cut out recently developed sites, we cut out heritage buildings, and we cut out 50% of the properties in heritage overlay areas. And you can see the total down the bottom dropping. We now have 36,000 sites. We then dropped out properties of less than 6 metres, and the total available sites at the end of that exercise, so these are sites that we thought could be developed on, was 34,000, or 6.6 thousand hectares. If you then apply a density to those, and here we've applied densities of 180 to 450, which sounds high, but let me show you what that looks like in a second. You could get a population of up to 2.4 million people living just adjacent to the tram and bus routes in Melbourne. This is what 237 people per hectare looks like. 449. Now, remember I said 450, so that's the maximum height you'd have to build along those areas. This is 900. This is Vienna. So we can get most of this population in about 5 or 6 stories for the first block piece of land along these tram and bus routes. This is what it looks like. We'd arbitrarily selected 4 of the areas around the centre of the city. This is Johnson Street. It's got a bus route running through, a pretty unimpressive street, but could possibly look like this. This is Nicholson Street. You can see the City of Melbourne in the background there, and you can see this expensive infrastructure, which is the tram line. You can see the underutilised properties that are adjacent to it. And this is not unfamiliar along a lot of our tram routes, and this is what it could look like. So you get the idea. Maribyrnong Road or Riversdale Road. If you get up and Google and have a look at some of these areas as a principle of how you do that, along the tram lines, which I'm going to highlight in a second, you'll see the built form is already changing. So this isn't something new. This is actually happening on the ground as we talk. Underneath those areas, the parcels are starting to be agglomerated. The secret is not to break out of that zone, not to, in fact, see the development going back into the residential areas where the character you would like to retain. And we've done it. In Swanston Street about 10, 15 years ago, we changed the height. Just one part of the planning scheme, we changed the height. And you can see the residential that's been built on the way up to the university, and right below it on the right-hand side, you can see it drop straight back down to about 2 or 3 stories. So it's not difficult. It's one simple mechanism in the planning scheme. We've actually developed a one-page planning scheme for the corridors. Don't build higher than the width of the street, cut-off angle to the back of the property, entry from the back. So you can throw away that planning scheme like that and go down to about 1 page. It frightens the planners. So this is what the system of transport around Melbourne looks like once you've taken the train lines, the activity centres and the bus routes. A well-distributed form of transport where you could get this happening. The last 1.5% comes from known redevelopment sites where there are already permits for about 200 people per hectare, and I won't go into that, but it gives you another 500,000 people living there. The rest, and this is the most important thing, 90% is suburbia. We can leave that alone. We can actually make that the new green lung of the city, which we're going to need. So what does that look like on a model? Looks a bit like this. There's the centre of the city. You run out those transport networks and you start to roll out this ribbon of high street. It looks a bit like this, and the stuff in between you leave alone. They become the new green wedges. There you encourage people to put photovoltaics on their roof, make their back gardens productive, collect their water, and plant more street trees. And at the bottom of their road, they've got urbanism with a doctor, creche, clinic, and all the other things they need. Albert Einstein got it right. We can't solve the problems by using the same kind of thinking we used to create them. We're going to have to think in a different way. So what does that different way look like? How do we actually get to this Melbourne at 8 million? Well, we've just introduced in Melbourne a planning scheme where we've identified exactly where we want the development. So we've thrown away 200 pages of strategic plan and we brought it down to 28. So if you're in a green and yellow area, you're in an area of establishment, and that area will always stay exactly as it is with minor changes. If you're in one of these orange areas, there's already a planning scheme and we'll modify that slightly to make sure that we get good sustainable development. If you're one of these red areas, we're going to make it very easy for you to develop there. So we're going to, in fact, try and fast-track the planning scheme, just as we fast-tracked residential in the early 1990s with postcode 3000. And this is what will happen. This is happening at the moment. This is Elizabeth Street. Elizabeth Street in a few years' time will look like that. There are already about 5 permits that have come through on this particular area. And areas like this, we will recycle into industrial and mixed use, and they'll start to look a little like this, and they'll be well connected by the new rail loop that is with the federal government for consideration. How do we do this thinking? Well, they're already doing it. The Victorian government, faced with people getting back onto the public transport system, made travel to the city before 7 o'clock free. 2,600 people moved before 7 o'clock. That saved them 5 trains, that's 100 million, and they forewent 15 million in fees. They saved themselves 85 million by just re-timetabling. Can we re-timetable our cities? I believe we can. We can be more sensible about how we use the real estate. Here are the real estate of the road. We can get more people into buses and trams than we can into cars. So let's just reallocate it. So if you're driving down Nicholson Street 5 o'clock in the night and you're sitting with your car and the bus in front of you is jammed in the traffic, look at the concrete next door and say, why isn't the bus running on that? Why is it not sharing the same shelter as the tram? It's that shift in thinking that we can so easily make and need to make. And if we do make it, and one of the criticisms of this proposal was that we'd congest the streets, but then you look at the ABS data and it tells you those people who live close to public transport use fewer cars. And we saw an example of where that could happen this afternoon. Imagine if we gave the priority to the bus system that they do in Curitiba, where we dedicate space in the roads so the bus can actually move quickly through the traffic, and how efficient that could be. And if we even realize that anybody who uses public transport mostly walks for 30 minutes a day, and therefore they're getting their exercise as part of their public transport, where someone sitting in a car driving in from the periphery walks for less than 7%. And the cost of obesity in Australia is 58 billion a year. And this caught my eye. And it was basically that apartments in 62 areas in Melbourne are selling faster than detached houses. So we've already moved there. And why have we moved there? Because this is what our population is doing. The fastest growing sector of the population is people over 50. And that population is going to double in the next 20 years. And I'm over 60. I don't want to live on the fringe in a 4-bedroom unit or a house. A lot of people want to live as part of a community. And those communities are much closer to the central city. We're going to have to change the way we build. And this building going up in Melbourne at the moment, what you're seeing there has been built in the last 10 days. It'll be finished by Monday morning when I get back. It's a unitized development by Nonda Katsoulides, built in the factory, stacked on site in about 3 weeks, and costing, I think, about 20% less than conventional construction. The savings are enormous. So what he's done, he's taken the ute and the nail gun, he's put it in the factory. The other thing we need to realize is there's still some myths out there. The myth is that solar voltaics is the most expensive way of getting energy. Solar voltaics have dropped from $12,000 for a 1.5 kilowatt array. This is a reputable energy company doing this, and you can pay 10% up front, the rest over 24 months, to the other day, $3,000. I know this because 18 months ago I started doing my house, and I got a quote. Christmas, it was down to $6,000. I paid $4,500 2 weeks ago, and the paper on Thursday, it went to $3,000. In the same time, our energy prices have doubled, gone up by 20%. So over the time that I'm going to repay my loan, the price is going to go up by 40% on my energy as we go to solar voltaics. And a 50 square kilometre solar panel will do all the energy needs of Australia. What we need is actually take the fear out of where we're going. These are proposals for the Venice Biennale by the architects of Australia, and this is called Australian urbanism. Is it no surprise that we live in fear of what the city might be in the future if we present it with these images? This is not helpful. Do you want to know what the reality looks like? This is Curtin Street. You can see the city in the back. You can possibly see a little tram coming down the left there. You know what it's going to look like in 20 years' time? It's going to look like that. There are going to be more trees. There are going to be solar voltaics on the roof. There's going to be water. There's going to be water collected. And there's going to be 4 or 5 stories running along that tram line. Not only is that sustainable and socially better than what we've got, but it's something very familiar. I hope when I go back to Dubai next time round, cities will be on the agenda. Thank you very much.